advice. Stay tuned to VOAR94.com, and don't forget you can also tune in with the TuneIn app.
Wait, come on.
Well, good evening, Carl Quilliam, and welcome to the show.
Good evening, thanks for having me.
Carl, I cannot stress how important housing is, how much it's made news, and how important it is to our listeners. And a great deal has been discussed in politics. Let me just mention the mention tax. For example, the Liberal Democrats are saying that they will charge people extra tax if they own a house for £2 million. Now, say example, I'm living in my house, and suddenly the way the prices go up, the way the market is something out of my control, suddenly I've fallen in, and I'm going to suddenly be lumbered with a big tax. Could you just explain that, how that works?
Certainly. I mean, obviously, I think the principle behind it is that the people with those really expensive properties over £2 million should bear some more of the burden in terms of the overall tax and getting the deficit down. In terms of how it works, there's been a change in the last couple of years as the Lib Dems have been in government. Danny Alexander at the Treasury commissioned a report into this, so we can actually make sure that it's not just something that comes in and clobbers people, and it doesn't have the sort of same cliff edges that the policy we had in 2010 did. So what it would be instead is a further 2 council tax bands once you hit 2 million, and then once that comes in as well, it will also be linked to inflation. So it will, as prices rise, the level at which the tax comes in will also rise. So it's not that kind of sledgehammer.
How does that differ from the Labour Party's mentioned tax of 2 million?
Labour have been much less clear in terms of how they're going to deliver theirs. They haven't spoken at all about extra council tax bands. They've spoken about a pure mansion tax, as far as I understand it, and they've been less clear about exactly how much they would charge and which properties would come within that. They claim it'll, I think, raise £1.5 billion, but they haven't really. It doesn't. From what they've told people, it doesn't seem to be able to raise that amount of money.
Just to let the viewers know, if you have thinking about what the most expensive house is in the UK, it's actually £68 million is the most expensive house. I'm sure they could pay a few billion extra tax. How does it? So, what's the Tory party stand in regards to this mention tax?
The Conservatives are opposed to it. They've blocked any kind of additional taxes on higher value properties for the last 5 years. I understand they will continue to do so. I think there is some disagreement within the party. So I think there's particularly disagreement between George Osborne and David Cameron, in that George Osborne was a lot more open to it when the Lib Dems first proposed it a few years ago. But David Cameron stepped in and said, no, we're not having that. And they weren't able to get past that in the coalition negotiations.
The other thing really important is the shortage of houses. How should you get again into government, and obviously, you know, I'm sure you'll admit that you're not going to be you're going to make the Nicola, you're not going to make the Prime Minister, perhaps and make Deputy Prime Minister again.
It's still possible.
Well, we'll just do that for the exercise. We'll assume that, shall we? For the viewers, what will you do about the shortage of housing? I'm talking especially in London.
It's a massive problem, and I think it's become more and more acute over the last few years. More and more people are being affected by this housing shortage. I think there was figures out in the last couple of weeks saying that there's only 49 homes for sale in London that are affordable for people on average incomes, which is madness in a city of sort of 7-8 million people.
I'm always curious about this affordable figure, because there's always some people can afford it, some can't. So I don't know how the figure affordable comes in, really.
I think it's this particular figure is based on average salaries. Obviously, it'll be different if you have a massive deposit, or there's lots of other factors. But the sort of long and the short of it is that most people on average salaries are going to struggle to be able to afford to buy a home in London. I mean, I think that's fairly self-evident from how things have gone. In terms of the Lib Dems' proposals, the Lib Dems are actually the only party, and that's across the board, whether you're talking about Labour, Conservative, UKIP, Green, SNP, that have committed to put together a plan to build 300,000 homes a year over the next Parliament, which is really what we need. If you can look at different figures from different organisations, but there's a fair consensus that we need to build between 250,000, 300,000 homes a year over the next 5 to 10 years just to meet demand and clear the backlog, because there's a shortage already. It's not something that's going to go away.
I mean, about housing again.
Yeah.
I'm always a little bit dubious about housing and how I see a lot of politicians saying, well, the people can't afford a house, people can't afford it. But the affordability of a house, or the price is at a ratio. So as prices are going up, it also shows that people are getting more wages and they can't afford to pay for them. Are the two things not linked?
I mean, obviously there is a link. I think there's particularly in London and particularly in central London, there has become a disconnect because of the rise in sort of big foreign investors, because of the rise in buy-to-let in particular. I mean, the number of private rental homes since 2008, I think, has gone from about 18 to 20% to over 30% in some constituencies in London. And that obviously has a knock-on effect in terms of ordinary first-time buyers being able to afford homes.
Well, I mean, the private landlord has seen the devil, but it could very well be the angel. Because let's look at, for example, when Thatcher came and sold the social housing stock off, that political policy was never reversed by the last government in 13 years, and that shortage has been made up by the private landlord. So, you know, they have benefited the housing in a sense, haven't they?
The shortage hasn't actually been made up by private landlords. There has been
But has it not helped?
I mean, it has had an impact in terms of, it must have had an impact in terms of supply. It's quite difficult to measure, you can't prove a negative, so it's quite difficult to measure what overall impact that has had. But like I was saying, there has been a rise in private rental, particularly in London, so that has taken up some of the supply. But a lot of that is actually people buying existing homes. Like I say, in terms of buy-to-let, they're not creating new homes, they're just changing existing homes from what would have been either home ownership or another form of tenure to a private rental. So it's a complex picture, and like you say, the private landlords aren't all the sort of the bad guy here. They have been sort of fulfilling a need in the market, but it's whether we want that to continue. I mean, if you look sort of back to the sort of 1920s when we had 55% private rental, is that really the kind of thing we want to get back to?
Listeners, thank you, Carl, and we'll be right back after this message. Program on VOAR radio every Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. If you are thinking of buying, selling, renting or investing, tune into the Property Expert Show every Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m.
You're listening to the Property Expert Show, presented to you by Mahmood Faiz, bringing you the latest property news and expert advice. Stay tuned to VOAR94.com, and don't forget you can also tune in with the TuneIn app. Welcome back, listeners. And obviously, budget is an issue in housing. I just want to let you know the cheapest house. The cheapest house in the UK is in Stoke-on-Tees, mere £5,000. Credit card limit, really. And I bet Carl could afford a few hundred of those. But just in case, Carl, you don't feel like living in Stoke-on-Tees, do you know Elizabeth Hurley's actually got her house up for sale?
I hadn't heard that, no.
No, there you go. You've got a chance to live in the stars, and it's mere £1,695,000. Liz Hurley, or as we like to call her, Liz, has put her countryside dream up for sale. Liz bought her country home in 2003 with hundreds of animals after the birth of her son Damien. The period property in Ambernoll is situated in the Crinchester and is made of natural Cotswold stone. The property boasts of 6 bedrooms, 4 reception rooms, 2 cottages, one of which is connected to the stable block. Now we know where he used to stay there when he stayed overnight. And of course, that's not the only one. Award-winning singer Adele has got her 10-bedroom mansion up in West Sussex on the market for £6 million. The lock has an amazing 20,000 square feet. That's the size for large Tesco's. And both swimming pools, tennis court, and of course what every girl needs, a helicopter pad. Adele once joked that 9 of the 10 bedrooms would never be used. And if like me, you like mowing the lawn, don't worry, it's got 25 acre grants to go with it. Now back to the serious news. Carl, we discussed how the Liberal has rebuilt houses, but I mean, in all essence, it's election time. Last 12 hours or whatever to the election, all political parties are promising this, aren't they? So how can we know that, what differentiates the Liberal Democrats from the others?
Well, like I said, we're the only party that have committed to the 300,000 homes a year. The Conservatives haven't committed to any number. They've got a whole raft of sort of different gimmicks that they've thrown out at the last minute that they claim are going to help first-time buyers and various different people. But if you actually look at the kind of things that they're doing, they're not really going to have much impact in terms of supply, which is the real issue. Similarly with the Labour Party, they have a plan, but the plan is to fail less badly than the Conservatives. So they want to build 200,000 homes a year, which is, as we discussed earlier, at least about 50,000 homes a year short of what we need. It's just not going to solve the problem.
Come to think of it, memory serves me right, John Prescott was building homes at only £60,000 and they would be sold to the public. I'm still waiting for my one.
I don't remember that. You've got a better memory than me. But
age does have its benefits, sir.
But yeah, I don't remember seeing them, definitely. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of policies that you need to get that to happen. It's not just a matter of setting a target. You then have to come up with a whole series of things to make sure that supply comes through. So it's obviously there's an element from the private sector, but the thing that's been missing and for quite a number of years, and the thing that used to sort of drive the delivery of homes was local authorities, local councils. And it was Margaret Thatcher that stopped local councils from building homes. Labour never did anything to allow them to do so again. And it's actually under the last coalition government for the first time local authorities were again allowed to build council homes. But at the moment that's not doing the job because they don't have the cash basically. So in the last year.
So where's all the parking fines going I've been paying? I've been paying thousands, Carl, in parking fines.
I guess that's a different question actually, but that's ring fenced for roads and transport and things like that. So that in theory it should go in like stuffing your potholes and all that kind of stuff. But whether it does, that's another thing entirely.
And of course, the other issue is, and that's concern for all, was the boom. Well, at that time, government said there'd be no boom and bust, but there was. I mean, what mechanisms have been put in place to make sure the banks lend responsibly and we don't have this bust again?
Well, there was a major banking bill. That was one of the first things that the coalition did when it came in. It was very much led by the Lib Dems. It was very much a lot of what Vince Cable was pushing for before the election. So it's not quite breaking up the banks, but separating off the kind of casino investment elements from the normal retail banking within banks themselves, and also giving them they have to hold higher reserves essentially, so they can't lend as much against the assets that they have, which does make it sometimes more difficult to lend mortgages, and that's why the government's had to do other things like bring in the Help to Buy scheme, which supports first-time buyers with mortgages, precisely because the banks are a bit more constrained and they have to be more responsible in terms of how much they lend and who they lend to.
But if the government was to interfere and help first-time buyers or buy-to-lets or whatever, could they not artificially stimulate the property and we could get another property boom?
That is a problem, and that's one of the criticisms of Help to Buy in particular, and that's why the supply issue is so important. It's so vital because there's room for what's called demand side measures like Help to Buy, which is about helping first time buyers, and other means of sort of helping with deposits like the proposed Help to Buy ISA policies like that. But the real crux of it, as I said before, is the supply side, and it's only the Lib Dems that are really tackling that. So in the last year, Danny Alexander talked about direct commissioning of housing from the Treasury, so using the Treasury's coffers to commission houses for sale and for rent. and there's a pilot going on at the moment to see how that works, and because it's a new thing for the government to be doing, it's not something the government's done for decades really. And if that works, I think it will. It's part of the Lib Dem manifesto to use that as a mechanism to get to this sort of magic number of 300,000 homes a year, and really start to tackle this supply issue, because there just isn't enough homes. There's too many people still stuck living with their parents. There's too many people who live in private rental but don't necessarily want to be there.
If you get the kids to move out, the Liberal Democrats, I think they'll have my vote.
Well, there you go. That is the real crux of it. That's what we want to do. We want to help those kids that are trapped at home get out of their parents' houses, get out from under their feet, and get some real independence.
So, if any of my listeners are listening to this Help to Buy scheme, how does that work?
It works if, as a listener, I mean, you just go to the bank and you get a mortgage. I mean, the way that it works, it's all done behind the scenes. The sort of the complex bit. It's the government guarantees mortgages, but it's banks that deliver them in the same way they would a normal mortgage. It just means that it's easier to get the mortgage, and you can get it for up to 95% of the value of a home. So you don't have to save for as long for the deposit. So it's really easy, as easy as getting a mortgage, which isn't always easy.
But how can we be sure that this person taking the 95% of the mortgage will be able to afford it? And what's the mechanism put in place? I
mean, that's down to the banks to make sure that they assess people in the way that they normally do. There are obviously the safeguards in place for that. But it's like anything. If you take out, whenever you take out a mortgage, you have to have that personal responsibility as well, in terms of understanding that your payments could go up, if interest rates go up and things like that. So you still have to be careful. It's not free money.
So in essence, if you borrow someone's money, you've got to pay it back eventually.
Exactly. I mean, that's to make a party political point. That's something that Labour still need to learn, I think.
Okay, well, we won't go into that because nobody having the Labour Party defend themselves.
That's fair enough.
There's only one voice for our community.
So you give us a break now.
The voice
Yeah.
of
You've got
Africa
2 minutes,
Radio
47
with
seconds,
Afrobeats
yeah?
of 94 FM.
So you should start 20 past, play your bits,
Yeah.
then play the station items and adverts at half past, and at 20 that gives you a break.
This is called
Yeah.
Blue Express.
So next stop we're going to do is at 40, yeah?
Yeah, okay, 1940. So another
Blue Express,
10 minutes.
available at the Health Food Centre.
Okay, right, so once we've done that,
talking about. Right, okay, let's go to see what them.
gives a chance to recuperate and work
Yeah,
what you
yeah,
want.
no, it's good, thanks.
Online from
You've got to pick on their camera now.
ukhealthfoodcentre.co.uk.
What if I said you can buy land in a prestigious location for as little as £800
Happy to
and
talk about
start
Tory housing
building your dream home
Sorry?
straight away?
I'm happy
That
to
is
talk
a
about
nice
Tory housing
thought, isn't
policy,
it?
sort of right to
Or
buy.
perhaps you want
Yeah.
to buy a house or
Homes
property
alike.
in a well-serviced and up-and-coming estate. These options, along with some unbelievable prices, are available right now if you want to.
For our community, the voice of Africa Radio with Afrobeats on 94 FM.
Well, welcome back, listeners, and we still have Carl Quilliam. He's kindly still with us. I think you've had a lot of say with the Liberal Democrats, but they know they will only be in a deputy position. Of course, the first position could very well be the Conservatives. So, what's the Conservative policy for housing?
Well, I don't want to speak for the Conservatives too much, but their sort of flagship policies, the stuff that they've been banging on about for this election, was extending the right to buy, which is something that Margaret Thatcher first brought in the 1980s for people that are in council homes. They want to extend it to housing association tenants, which obviously for the people that live in housing association homes could be a good thing. They get a discount, they can get onto the property ladder. But in terms of actually the overall delivery of homes, again, getting back to that, I don't want to sort of bore people to death, but getting back to that supply issue, it has a real bad impact in terms of housing associations' ability to build homes, because they act like a business. So essentially what you're doing is you're taking the asset of a business that they could normally borrow against to build, and you're selling it off for a massive discount. So they lose.
So, in other words, they could be sending housing association into bankruptcy, really.
I don't think it would quite get to that point, but what it does is it makes it really difficult to build new homes, because if you spend £200,000 building a new house, somebody moves in, within 2 years they can buy that home at up to a 70% discount. So. Exactly. Well, £140,000. Well, it's capped at it's capped at £100,000 at the moment, or just over.
Yeah.
So it'd be a £100,000 discount, and that makes it really difficult. Firstly, to go to the bank and say, actually, I want to build these homes, because they're going to come back to you and say, well, you're not going to get any. You might get 2 years worth of rent out of this, but you're not going to be able to pay us back, because someone could buy this off you, you'd be forced to sell it at a discount. So could have a really bad impact on there's 1,500 or so housing associations across the country. There's about 6 big private house builders. So if you want those 1,500 or so housing associations to build homes, you can't be taking their assets away. You have to do it in a way that means that they can still build homes, and this isn't going to, it's not going to help with that at all. In terms of the other stuff that they've been talking about, I mean, I think they've said they want 100,000 homes just for first-time buyers. So you could buy. The idea is that you could buy those at about 80% of the market value, and the way that they're going to pay for that is by scrapping what's called Section 106 payments, and they're used for a lot of things. It's like community investment type stuff, but primarily they're used for affordable homes. So if you build, say, 1,000 homes in an area. A proportion.
Well, that's like robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Exactly. Exactly. That again is going to stifle the delivery of affordable homes, because if you're building 1,000 homes in an area, normally you'd have to give between 10 to 20% of that should be affordable homes. And what the Tories are saying is you don't have to deliver those affordable homes. Instead, what you'll do is you'll deliver these sort of 80% market sale homes. And the idea is there's a sort of double whammy with it, because the idea is that this sort of Section 106 money, scrapping it, is to get them to invest in hard to build on sites. So sites that, even in the last 5 years where we've been focusing on getting brownfield sites, difficult sites built on, that still haven't been built on. So they're really expensive to build on. You're going to get this sort of small discount from the government, the developer is, and then they're going to ask you to sell them for 80%, and it's not going to be viable.
I mean, the other thing you mentioned just now was land, and land's obviously very expensive, and hence that reflects housing. But we know that large number of retail stores, and also I'm not going to mention the name, but the large 3, 4 actually hold land as banks, so that another other store can open in that area. It's stifling competition for one thing, and second is obviously less land, less houses for our families to and our friends and neighbours to buy. I mean, is the government considering doing anything on that to try and sort of make more brownfield land available?
I think the first thing to do, and the easiest thing to do, is on public sector land. So there's a lot of land out there that's owned by councils, that's owned by the NHS, that's owned by sort of quangos that you've probably never heard of, like the HCA, and it's all kind of sat out there, but there's no one place where you can go and find where that is. So if you're a developer, you're a housing association, you're somebody that wants to build some homes, it's really difficult to get a grasp on where that land is and whether you're going to be able to use it, buy it, what kind of planning permission it has, all kind of that kind of stuff. So the first thing to do, and that is with Dem policy, I think, is, to be fair to the other parties, they've looked at it as well, is to get that out there into the public domain, so people know what it is and we can get building on it. Because a lot of it is ideal for housing. It's in exactly the right places, near to train stations, near to the infrastructure that you need. Because you can't just sort of throw a load of houses up anywhere and expect that to be alright. You've got roads, schools, hospitals, all that kind of stuff that goes with that goes with it. So I think that's the best place to start.
Yeah, absolutely, Carl. I couldn't agree more. But what I'm worried about is the mechanisms that need to put in place to collate all the knowledge from all the different quangos and agencies in sort of say one place, or one person responsible that could possibly then take a step forward. But before you get a chance to answer, we're just going to go for another quick break and message from our promoters.
Take us everywhere with you. Find us online at www.voar94.com or on 94 FM. All day, every day.
The voices you are about to hear are that of real James William estate agent customers sharing their experience and not actors.
My name is Tanya and I rent a flat from James William estate agents. The staff were very helpful and professional at all the times.
We sold our flat with James William quite quickly and they found the right buyer for our property. As well, they're quite professional and cooperative and they were really helpful in all the process. And we really think this is one of the best agencies so far that we have dealt.
And just before we get back to Carl, another bit of news for you. Al Miliband was asked what's his favorite place in his house. You'll be pleased to know it's not the kitchen where he eats his bacon sandwich. It's actually the bedroom. It's not what you're thinking. He says sleeping is very important. That's what he told us. Carl, getting back again to the seriousness and housing as I say, I mean, obviously different political parties have different views, but I personally believe that a private landlord can be helpful rather than if done the right way. I mean, what if the political parties or political men could be put into place where rather than work against the landlord and demonize them, we could actually learn to work with them. And I think they could do quite a lot there. I mean, what will your party do to encourage more investment either for renting or for investing? And that could again increase supply of homes, couldn't it, from the private sector?
I mean, of course, and I think the things that you can do, it is around the supply of land. It's the stuff that we were talking about before. It's making public sector land available to developers, whether that is private developers, whether that's housing associations, whether that's local councils, whoever it is who are the people that are looking to build. Getting that land out there is a real way of doing it. Obviously, I mean, if you look at the last 5 years, the other thing that you can do is around planning and giving some more flexibility around planning. You have to be careful because you go too far with that and you end up turning local communities against development because things happen against their will, against their wishes in their areas. But I think the stuff around the national planning framework has been really, it's been one of the successes of the government to get some of that flexibility out there. But there's still so much more to do. It's just a start. It's not a panacea by any means.
You start at the end, beginning at the end as well.
Exactly. And the thing I would say as well about, I mean, I agree we shouldn't be sort of demonising private landlords, but I think there is an issue when you go from a very small percentage of people living in private rental to now a lot of people, not just young people, but people with families, older people as well, living in private rental for a long time. You do need to be able to give them some more rights, I think, and particularly around security of tenancies and stuff like that, which the Lib Dems have talked about, not in the sort of blanket way that Labour have, but giving people longer tenancies and the option of longer tenancies and more stability over the rents that they're going to pay within that, I think it is important.
I mean, obviously, as you know, I practically work in the housing market, so it's hands-on experience I'm speaking from. And obviously, I absolutely agree, there are some terrible landlords, but there are also some terrible tenants. There are the French model, I believe, I'm not sure if they're the German model, which actually has a 3-year tenancy agreement, but the tenant is responsible for the upkeep of the house.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, when you do things like that, there's always going to be a trade-off. I mean, I was in Munich a couple of weeks ago visiting a friend out there, and they have lifetime tenancies in Germany. So once you sign up to live somewhere, you can live there for 20, 30 years, the whole of your life if you want. But the trade-off for that is that you have to pay a 2.5 month deposit, and then the fees that you pay to the letting agent, that's 3 months. So you're essentially paying, almost the deposit on a house. You could be paying in London, you could be paying £5,000 up front. So you do have to be careful when you bring in sort of extra regulation like this, that it's not going to have too many of these unintended consequences, and just basically you can leave people on the street if you're really not careful.
I absolutely agree with you. I think you made a lot of sense when you said that. You've got to be careful of regulating, not too much and obviously not too little. But you know, I mean, the other way which may encourage more people to invest in property as a landlord is I always come across lots of cases where people can simply not pay their rent. The landlord waits 2 months until he can do a court notice. The court takes another 3 months. They still don't move, and the bailiffs take another month. So they can live 6 months in a house and absolutely pay nothing, demolish the property, disappear, and there's no recourse for the landlord. So what I'm trying to look at is, I mean, what balance is there to try and not only demonise but encourage private investment into the UK property market? Because I think that essentially it's not the complete answer, but it certainly could be some of the answer, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, you know more about this sort of part of the market than I do. I've worked for a housing association, which is quite a heavily regulated part of the market. But you do, with regulation, you do sometimes you get benefits as well. So as a housing association, it's easier to borrow money at lower rates if you do want to build homes, precisely because you are regulated, because the lenders know that the HCA is on your back, looking at your finances. So there, it's like I say, it's a balance. I think there is more that can be done in terms of private rental. There's certainly more in terms of getting institutional investment into private rental. I think that could have a real sort of big impact in terms of the sort of volume delivery that we need. So there are things to be done, but on that specific thing, it's like I say, it's not something I have a lot of experience of. It's not something I know a lot about.
Well, no, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I'm just going to give you an idea, and this is something that I put across to David Osborne. There's a competition running by another radio station, obviously not one as good as this one, London-based one, of course. They can't be. This is the best one.
Yeah.
And one of the ideas they said was, well, you know, if at the banking class, what would you have done? And I said, well, instead of giving money to the banks, what I would have done is said to everybody, if you don't have a buy-to-let mortgage, the government pay 1% of your mortgage. Therefore, the landlord and the household would lend much cheaper. The housing market the next day would boost up because there'd be so many people buying. The housing list would go down. The housing market still stay stable, and we will still have jobs. And actually laughed at this. Do you know what? We'll actually write to him and tell him this. So I don't know what became, but if the Tories ever do that, that was my idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I would say about that is, like you were saying before, you got to be careful in terms of pumping up demand with things like that. It's always, I don't want to bang on about it. I know I'm a Liberal Democrat, and balance is one of our watchwords. But
you may be forgiven for your sins, sir. You may be forgiven one day for your sins. We talked about housing, we talked about, what about, I mean, getting back again, tenant versus landlord, I'm looking for a balance here. We've had a lot of local authorities bringing the landlord license, which holding landlords to account, and obviously for good landlords, they can arrest it, they can do it.
Yeah.
How does that shift at the bad landlord? Because the bad landlords say we will not rest of their properties, and the landlords are paying out more money, which then reflects on the tenant, which pushes their rent up. We've seen this happen quite extensively in Newham, where rent went up from £1,250 to £1,500, simply because landlords obviously had to not only pay the license, but the administration and what goes with the administration of actually going to visit the house every 6 months and write out a report as well. Shouldn't there be something similar done for tenants, a legal obligation on them, run by local authorities and government?
I'm not convinced that tenants. I mean, it's going to be difficult to license tenants. It's not really. I don't think it'd be really practical to do something like that. Obviously, there's a give and take in anything like this. But I would say, firstly, I think the idea of licensing is good overall. I think the way that it's done at the moment, it's not really fit for purpose. The system that they put in wasn't designed to do what they're trying to do with it. It was designed to tackle antisocial behaviour. I think it's in some ways it's better than nothing, where you do have a big problem with sort of slum landlords and things like that. And you can like you say, you can tackle those ones that aren't the bad landlords. But there's problems with it, and I think whoever is the next government, And particularly if there are Liberal Democrats in that government, they really need to look at this across the board in terms of the private rental sector, what it's going to look like in the future. Because like I say, it's a massive part of the market now, and obviously landlords experience problems as well. But the overall rights of tenants and how that works, I think, is going to have to be different in the future when you're having families living in private rental long term. So sort of as an example, and to sort of go back to a bit what you were saying about the rising prices because of the licensing. I still live in private rental. I moved into a place just over a year ago. 2 months in, turns out my landlord couldn't pay his mortgage. I don't know why that was, but I had to move out within a month. That was it. I had no time really to find another place. The letting agent that I used wouldn't tell me anything. The only way that I found out anything was because I knew a lawyer, and they helped me sort of guide me through the process. So there's sort of two elements to that. One is that I didn't have any recourse. I couldn't get it. There was no obligation on them to give me a refund on the fees that I paid or anything like that. But secondly, it's like you're saying, if you increase quite quickly sort of regulation charges, you start capping rents all of a sudden on landlords, then that's going to happen to a lot more people, especially if interest rates go up. Landlords just aren't going to be able to pay their mortgage. So if you are going to do this kind of stuff, there does have to be that give and take. You have to understand what's going to happen and deal with those unintended consequences, because otherwise you're going to hurt the landlord and you're going to hurt the tenant at the same time. And
they will have less houses even. Too.
Exactly, yeah. So.
I mean, what you say does make a lot of sense to me, and I suppose on the other side, if I had anybody else from another political, but they'd be saying very similar things. So they're not.
I don't know if they would, to be honest.
Yeah, that's true. Obviously, different parties have different views and points. I agree with you. What else do you think you can do? I mean, the other thing we have in this country is shortage of skills. Yeah. We've never really had builders or plumbers because apprentices were spent under tax. So if you've got the land, you've got the bricks, you've got the mortar, there's nobody to build them, Carl.
No, it's a major problem. And like I said, in my day job, I work for a housing association, and across the sector, people are finding that we've sort of part of the reason that we're not building enough is because there aren't people to build, and that's about again to go back to the supply, but it's also about the volatility in the market. So if we can do things that keep the supply going when either house prices are static or when the economy is not doing so well, we can keep that skill base there. So what you want to do actually is flatten.
What about apprenticeships? Why can't we do more apprenticeships?
I mean, the Lib Dems and government have delivered 2 million more apprenticeships in the last 5 years. There's still more to do, and I think especially in the building sector. But these things take time. You can't just magic builders out of the air overnight. And it's gonna take a while for this to come through the system, because in the crash we were talking about earlier, the crash in 2008, there was a major crash in the property market. Some of the big house builders almost went under, and it took them a long time to recover. And all those people that were builders then, that were building, a lot of them decided they'd go and do a different job, and they've moved out of the market. So we have to find new ones.
My name is Mahmoud Faz. Listen to my new program on VOAR radio every Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. If you are thinking of buying, selling, renting or investing, tune into the Property Expert Show every Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m.
4 minutes left, or 5 minutes left.
5 minutes left. Well, listeners, I hope you've enjoyed the show and you've learned something. Certainly I have. Obviously, whichever way you vote, tomorrow Thursday is the election day, and obviously it's whatever political party comes in, it's very important to go out to vote, and the housing is very, very important. Getting back to obviously if you wanted to buy a sort of some of the stars in the home, there's plenty of houses on the market. I'm just going to give you I'll give you the cheapest and the dearest house. I'm just going to give you the most affordable house. The most affordable house on the market, in my opinion, and that's my personal opinion, is a 3-bedroom ground floor masonette on the borders of Stratford City, ex-local authority with front and rear garden, double glazed, gas centered, for mere £330,000. Could be a good investment, could be a good one for a family to move in. So that's my cheapest home you have. So you've seen the dearest, the cheapest, the best buy, the cheapest mortgage, the dearest mortgage, and next week we will be discussing how to actually get on the property ladder and what's the first steps to take. And the first step to take is obviously to check how much money we have in our pocket. And the way to do that is to get a mortgage advisor on the show. So we will have a mortgage advisor next week telling you how you can raise funds to buy either your first family home, your second holiday home, or as a buy-to-let. And the mortgage is very, very important. It's one of the things that sort of went wrong with the last government and sort of fell, and the bank crisis happened, and it sort of then had a rigmarole effect, not only just on housing, but then on economy and everything else. So see you listeners, see you next week. And tune in same time, same day.
Right, okay, he's getting used to it. It's his first live one, right?
Okay.
Okay, you know really well. Good.